She hides in an abandoned cabin to avoid getting married off until the Duke shows up at her door. Hello readers, welcome to this channel. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do so, sit back and relax as we dive into this story. 1. The air inside the old abandoned cabin smelled of pine needles and cold earth. This was Anabelle Marian's kingdom now. At 24, she was a strong-willed young woman who had chosen this isolation over the suffocating life waiting for her back home. Anabelle was hiding. Her family was set on marrying her off to Lord Thomas Everett, a pompous aristocrat who smelled strongly of expensive cologne and entitlement. Her father insisted on the union. It was a strategy, he said, to secure the family's future and fix their small financial problems. But for Anabelle, the idea of marrying Thomas was abhorrent. He represented everything she despised: arrogance, entitlement, and an unyielding demand for obedience. "I would rather live with the spiders than marry that man," she had told her maid before slipping away in the dead of night. The cabin was deep in the woods, hours from her family's estate. It was barely more than 4 wooden walls and a leaky roof, but it was her roof. Anabelle had cleaned it herself, patched the roof with thick pieces of bark, and made a bed of straw and blankets. Here, she lived a quiet, modest life. She enjoyed the peace and the freedom to read her beloved books without judgment, to think deep thoughts, and to reflect on her refusal to be controlled by her family. She cooked simple meals over a small fire she built herself and fetched water from a nearby stream. She found a profound solace in her independence. Every day spent in the cabin was a victory against the grand life her father planned for her. She had time to think, truly think, about what she wanted, a life where her mind was valued as much as her dowry. But even the thick woods could not completely block out the world. The looming pressure to marry still hung over her like a heavy, cold cloud. Sometimes, as the fire died down and the cabin became dark, Anabelle would stare into the flickering embers and wonder, "How long can I keep hiding?" She knew her father was hunting for her, desperate to finalize the marriage with Lord Everett. The fear of being forced back into that life, into a suffocating marriage, into endless balls and polite hypocrisy, was a constant, cold presence. She was tired of running, but she was not tired of being free. She picked up a thick, worn book on astronomy and tried to focus on the stars, the only honest things she knew. But tonight, her mind kept spinning back to the terrible choice: Lord Everett or the lonely woods. It felt like her independence was an old, weak shield against the powerful world of her family. She closed the book with a heavy sigh. She was only 24, but she felt as old and worn as the cabin itself. She had hoped to find a man who was her equal, a partner, not a master. But men like that, men who saw women as partners, did not exist in her world. They only existed in the romantic stories she read. Anabelle stood by the small, dirty window, looking out at the thick, dark forest. The trees offered protection, but they also felt like bars on a cage. She was hidden, but she was also trapped. She knew her time was running out. Sooner or later, someone would find her. And when that happened, her brief, sweet taste of freedom would be over. She just hoped she would be ready to face the music when it came. 2. Miles away, in a manor that spoke of old money and cold duty, lived Duke Alexander Hawthorne. At 34, he was a man burdened, not by poverty, but by obligations. He felt the heavy weight of his title, the responsibility for his large estates, and the high expectations placed upon him by the entire aristocratic society. His family's wealth and status came with a steep cost. For years, Alexander had been playing the role of the perfect duke, cold, disciplined, and aloof. Society saw him as the ideal match for any high-born lady, rich, handsome, and powerful. But in truth, Alexander was deeply disillusioned by the superficiality of it all. He was tired of polite smiles that hid sharp knives and conversations that were only about money and status. His family's debts, though small compared to his total fortune, were a nagging problem. He needed a marriage with a respectable fortune to secure the future of a struggling estate he treasured. When Alexander learned of Anabelle Marian's name, it was through his family's financial advisor. Anabelle's dowry was large, and her family's name was clean. She was presented as the last potential match that fit his strict criteria. Alexander was ready to approach her with a stiff, formal proposal, a business arrangement for mutual benefit. But then, the rumors started coming. He heard tales of her strong character and her complete resistance to traditional marriage. He heard that she had run away to avoid being married off. These rumors, which would have put off any other duke, did the opposite for Alexander. He became deeply intrigued. "She ran away?" he asked his cousin, Lord Percy. Percy snorted. "Yes, hiding like a rabbit in the woods, they say, to avoid Lord Everett. Undignified, your grace, unstable, you should look elsewhere." "No," Alexander said, his eyes thoughtful. "A woman who would choose the woods over a life of luxury just to keep her own thoughts, that is not instability. That is courage." He suddenly found himself captivated by the idea of marrying someone who might be as independent as he often wished he could be. A woman who defied society's rules might be the perfect antidote to his cold, rigid life. Alexander decided to ignore his advisor's advice. He wasn't going to send a formal letter. He was going to find her himself. He felt a rare surge of excitement, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a boy. This was not duty. This was a personal quest. He headed out to find Anabelle, dressed in riding clothes, not his ducal silks. He rode for days, following loose rumours and the rough directions provided by a distant gamekeeper. He was determined to offer a proposal that could solve their problems, a practical solution for two people trapped by the same society. But in his heart, he hoped for something more. He hoped for a partnership built on respect, something he hadn't dared to dream of before. The journey was rough, the gamekeeper's directions were vague, and the woods were thick. For the first time in years, Alexander was relying on his own wits, not his title. He slept under the stars and ate dry biscuits. He felt lighter, freer, with every mile that separated him from the suffocating manor houses of London. Finally, after 3 days of riding, he saw a faint plume of smoke rising above the trees. He tied his horse, smoothed down his jacket, and took a deep breath. He was about to confront the one woman in England who refused to be bought or ordered. Alexander walked toward the tiny, rough cabin. He knew he had to be careful. A woman who runs from marriage is not easily convinced. He raised his hand and gave a firm, polite knock on the old wooden door, hoping his title would not send her running even deeper into the woods. 3. Alexander arrived at the cabin and was struck by its humble setting. It was smaller and rougher than he had imagined. The small, abandoned house stood quiet against the enormous, silent woods. Anabelle opened the door, and the air immediately became tense. She wore a simple patched dress, and her hair was tied back with a piece of string. Her face was smudged with soot from the fire, but her green eyes were sharp and intelligent. Confusion quickly turned to anger when she recognized the quality of his riding boots and the cut of his jaw. "You," she said, her voice flat, not a question, but an accusation. "Are you with Lord Everett? Did my father send you?" Alexander took a step back, surprised by her immediate hostility. He cleared his throat, trying to use the calm, measured voice of the Duke. "My name is Alexander Hawthorne, and no, I am not with Lord Everett or your father. I am the Duke of Hawthorne, and I am here alone." Anabelle's eyes widened slightly at the title, but her expression hardened. "A duke? Here? To what do I owe the great honour of a nobleman visiting my humble, abandoned home?" "I know why you are here," Alexander began, trying to keep his tone cordial. "To avoid marriage, and I am here to offer you one." Anabelle gave a short, bitter laugh. "You rode 3 days through the wilderness to offer me the very thing I am hiding from. You are more foolish than Lord Everett. The answer is no, Your Grace. I am not interested in marriage to anyone." Alexander was surprised by her dismissive tone. He was used to women falling over themselves to accept him. But he kept his composure. "I understand your resistance, but I insist that you at least hear me out before sending me back to London with my tail between my legs." He proposed a marriage of convenience. "Anabelle, my family needs respectability and a modest fortune to settle an old debt. Your family needs a powerful name to secure their standing. You will gain security and a title that even your father cannot force you to give up, and I will gain what I need." "And what do I gain beyond an expensive jail cell?" she challenged, crossing her arms. "Freedom," Alexander replied, his voice suddenly dropping lower. "The freedom you have now. Our marriage would be one where we both have our independence. We would be partners, not master and servant. I am as tired of the rigidity of society as you are. I have no desire to control you or demand obedience." He began to speak of his own frustrations with society, his desire to live a life beyond his title, and his unwillingness to marry for anything but genuine partnership. He spoke of the hypocrisy, the empty conversations, and the loneliness that came with being the perfect duke. As he spoke, Alexander lost his stiff formal manner. He spoke with a raw honesty that caught Anabelle off guard. He wasn't arrogant, he was simply tired. Anabelle lowered her guard, just a fraction. "You say you don't want to control me, but you are still asking me to trade the woods for a gilded cage." "Perhaps," Alexander admitted, "but we can build the cage together, and we can leave the door open." Anabelle was intrigued by Alexander's sincerity and found herself unsure how to respond. This man was nothing like the pompous, self-important men she had known. She suggested a test. "If you truly understand my desire for freedom, then spend time here, with me, in the cabin. Forget your title, forget your duties. Stay for a few days, and let us see if this arrangement of ours could be more than just a convenience. If you run back to London after a day, I will know you are just like the rest." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, then smiled a genuine, warm smile that transformed his aloof face. "A truce. I accept your terms, Anabelle Marian." The two of them agreed to a temporary truce. Anabelle still had her doubts, but for the first time since she fled the city, she felt a flicker of hope that the future might hold something truly different. For, over the next few days, the small abandoned cabin became the unlikely stage for the beginning of a remarkable relationship. Alexander did not run back to London. He accepted the hard terms of the truce. He shed his tailored coat and helped Anabelle chop wood, his hands quickly getting calloused and dirty. He ate her simple meals, stew and tough bread, without a single complaint. He spoke no word of his title, and Anabelle forgot to treat him as a duke. He was just Alexander, the man who was surprisingly bad at building a fire, but knew everything about the stars. They began to share stories and personal histories. Alexander spoke of his childhood, being groomed for duty, and the moment he realized his life was not his own. Anabelle spoke of her mother's love for poetry, and her own longing for a life of purpose, not just presentation. In rare moments, they shared genuine laughter. One evening, Alexander tried to catch a fish in the stream, and fell in head first. Anabelle laughed so hard she cried, and Alexander, soaking wet, laughed with her. Anabelle quickly came to realize that Alexander was not the stiff, emotionless aristocrat she had imagined. He was thoughtful, deeply intelligent, and incredibly kind. When he talked about the people who worked on his estate, his voice was full of genuine concern, not just cold duty. And Alexander began to see that Anabelle was not the spoiled, rebellious lady he had expected. She was fiercely independent, deeply read, and incredibly strong. Her hands were capable, and her mind was sharp. "You have more courage hiding in this cabin than any general I know in the city," he told her one evening as they watched the sunset. "And you have more honesty in your heart than any duke in London," she countered. Anabelle saw that Alexander had a depth she had not expected. His willingness to take risks with his own reputation coming to the cabin, getting his hands dirty, slowly broke through her walls. She started to wonder if, perhaps, there could be more to marriage than just survival. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a true partnership. Her trust in Alexander grew. She realized that their shared hatred for the superficiality of their world was the strongest bond they had. He didn't want to possess her. He wanted to share his life with her. After a week in the cabin, Alexander dressed in his riding clothes, ready to leave. The test was over. "Well, Anabelle," he said, his voice quiet, "I kept the truce. I know the choice is still yours." Anabelle took a deep breath. She could still say no. She could still have her quiet freedom. But it suddenly felt lonely. She looked at the man who had traded his ducal life for a week of simplicity, and saw a man she could respect, a man she could love. "I will give the marriage a chance," she said firmly, "but with one important condition." Alexander nodded, prepared for anything. "Our lives will be our own. We will maintain our independence. Our partnership will be rooted in respect and understanding, not obligation or command. We will be equals. I will be your duchess, but I will be Anabelle first. If you try to cage me, I will run back to these woods." Alexander smiled, the full, genuine smile that had charmed her. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Anabelle. I need an equal, not an obedient wife. I promise you this. Your freedom will be my sacred duty." They shook hands on the deal, a formal, binding bargain made in an abandoned cabin, under the watchful, silent eyes of the woods. 5. Anabelle and Alexander returned to her family's estate, and the ensuing chaos was enormous. Anabelle's father was so shocked that his daughter had returned not with Lord Everett, but with the Duke of Hawthorne, that he could barely speak. Lord Everett was furious and left London in a huff. The marriage was formalized in a small, quiet ceremony, far from the whispers of the London elite. Neither of them expected a fairy tale romance. They agreed to maintain their independence, each respecting their shared commitment to the new life. Anabelle took on the role of duchess with a quiet dignity, but she was not the typical society wife. She refused to spend her time on empty social visits, preferring to manage the Duke's library and oversee the educational plans for the tenants' children. Alexander was happy to let her be. Their lives were their own, and their independence was respected. But as time passed, they began to develop a deeper bond, a bond neither of them had anticipated. Alexander's respect for Anabelle's intelligence, wit, and strength of character grew with each passing day. He started taking her to his private meetings, listening intently to her sharp, honest opinions, often introducing her to important figures as my trusted partner and Duchess. Anabelle found herself drawn to Alexander's vulnerability and his willingness to break free from the rigid expectations of society. He would often discard his ducal clothes at the end of the day and ask her to teach him about the constellations, a reminder of their time in the cabin. One cold evening, Alexander returned from Parliament, tired and frustrated by the political hypocrisy he had witnessed. He found Anabelle in the library, reading by the fire. She put down her book and simply held his hand, not asking for details, just offering comfort. I don't know why I feel so comfortable with you, Alexander confessed, resting his head against hers. You are the one person in my life who has never asked me to be the Duke. You just let me be Alexander. And you are the one person who gave me freedom instead of a cage, Anabelle replied softly. In that final tender moment, Anabelle realized that, despite all their differences and hesitations, she had found love with the very man she had initially rejected. It wasn't the passionate, sudden love of the stories she read, but a deep, enduring love built on respect, shared understanding, and hard-earned trust. Alexander turned to her, his eyes serious and gentle. Anabelle, I came to you for a business deal, for a convenient title. I stayed because I fell in love with the woman who chose a leaky roof over a lord's gilded cage. You are the partner I needed, and the wife I never dared to dream of. Anabelle's heart swelled. She reached up and touched his face. And you, Alexander, are the only man who has ever truly seen me. As they shared their first true kiss, a tender, powerful promise, they both understood that their convenient partnership had blossomed into something real, something worth more than all the titles and wealth in the world. Their love was uniquely their own. The story ends with Alexander and Anabelle walking hand in hand through the vast formal gardens of Ashford House. They were no longer trapped by their titles or expectations, but free to love and live as equals. They had created a love based on the most important thing of all, the freedom to be themselves. The woman who ran to the woods found her truest love with the Duke who came looking for her. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us continue creating more stories of love, redemption, and second chances that matter. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our romantic stories. Click and discover more beautiful tales of courage and connection. With all our gratitude, Duke's Story.